The great hall of Athoria Prime stretched for nearly a mile, and Admiral Daniel Carter felt very small as he walked toward the center platform where the 12 elder species waited to judge his kind. He had been a soldier for 30 years, had faced death more times than he could count, had watched friends die in the cold silence of space, but nothing had prepared him for this moment when the fate of 8 billion humans rested on his shoulders. The Galactic Council sat in a curved formation above him, each representative positioned on a floating throne that reflected the power and age of their civilization. The Veilith Arbiter spoke first, its insectoid mandibles clicking together in a sound that the translator rendered as cold, formal speech. "Humanity stands accused of crimes against galactic order," the Arbiter declared, and Carter felt his stomach tighten. He looked up at the 12 faces, some humanoid, some utterly alien, and saw no sympathy in any of them. The charges were read aloud, and each one felt like a knife in his chest. Unauthorized expansion into 17 star systems. Colonization of 3 worlds claimed by elder species. Unregulated population growth that threatened the balance of resources. And the final charge, the one that made Carter clench his fists, aggressive adaptation, which apparently meant that humans changed too quickly, evolved their technology too fast, and refused to stay in the place the Council had assigned them. "These are not crimes," Carter said, his voice steady despite the fear that churned inside him. "These are the actions of a species trying to survive and grow. The same actions every species in this hall took when they were young." The Veilith Arbiter made a sound that might have been laughter. "You compare yourselves to us," it said. "You have been spacefaring for 60 years, and in that time you have spread like a disease across systems that took us millennia to reach. You breed without control, you consume without thought, and you show no respect for the traditions that have kept peace in this galaxy for 100,000 years." Carter wanted to argue, wanted to scream that humans had every right to exist and grow and dream of something greater, but he knew that his words meant nothing here. The verdict had been decided long before he arrived. The Tyranny representative, a being made of living crystal that chimed when it moved, spoke next. "We have deliberated for 3 cycles," it said, "and we have reached a unanimous decision." Carter braced himself. "Humanity is exiled from all Council space," the Veilith Arbiter announced. "You will be given 30 cycles to gather your people and your vessels. You will be escorted to the boundary of the Shroud, and you will not return." The Shroud. Carter had heard stories about that region of space, a vast expanse of radiation storms, gravitational anomalies, and dead worlds that stretched for thousands of light years beyond the edge of civilized space. No species had ever survived there for more than a decade. "You are sentencing us to death," Carter said, and his voice was quiet now, heavy with the weight of what he was hearing. "We are giving you a chance," the Arbiter replied, "which is more than your behavior deserves. If humanity is as adaptable as you claim, perhaps you will find a way to survive. If not, the galaxy will be better for your absence. P." Carter stood in silence for a long moment, looking at each of the 12 representatives, memorizing their faces, their species, their names. He would not forget this. None of his people would forget this. "May I say one final thing before I leave?" he asked. The Arbiter waved a limb in permission. Carter straightened his spine, lifted his chin, and spoke in a voice that carried across the vast hall. "My species has faced extinction before," he said. "We have survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and famines that should have wiped us from existence. We have crawled out of every grave the universe has dug for us, and we have come back stronger each time." He paused, and the silence in the hall was absolute. "You think the Shroud will kill us," he continued. "You think that in a generation, humanity will be nothing but bones and wreckage drifting in the void. But you are wrong. The Arbiter's mandibles clicked with what might have been annoyance. We will survive, Carter said. We will adapt, we will grow, and we will remember. We will remember every species that sat in judgment today, every voice that condemned us, every hand that pointed us toward death. He turned and began walking toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the silence. And one day, he called back without looking, when you need us, when something comes that your ancient fleets cannot stop, and your proud civilizations cannot survive, you will call out into the void for help. He reached the door and finally turned to face them one last time. And we will answer, he said, not because you deserve it, but because that is who we are. Then he was gone, and the hall erupted in whispers and clicking and chiming as the elder species discussed what they had just witnessed. Most of them laughed. Humanity was a young species, barely out of its cradle, full of pride and bluster that would mean nothing when the shroud crushed them. Within 100 years, no one would even remember their name. Valith Arbiter did not laugh. It sat in silence on its throne, watching the door through which Carter had departed, and felt something it had not experienced in a very long time. It felt doubt. The next 30 days were chaos for the human species. Families were torn from homes they had built on distant worlds. Businesses were abandoned. Friendships with other species were severed, as the Council made clear that any civilization offering aid to humanity would face severe consequences. Carter worked without sleep, coordinating the evacuation of 17 colonies, organizing the fleet that would carry his people into exile, and trying to maintain hope when everything seemed lost. On the final day, as the last human vessels gathered at the boundary markers, Carter stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched Council warships form a wall behind them. There would be no going back. His communications officer, a young woman named Amy Grant, looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Sir," she said, "what do we do now?" Carter looked at the view screen, at the swirling chaos of the shroud that awaited them, at the hell that was supposed to be their grave. "Now," he said quietly, "we show them what humanity can do." He gave the order, and the fleet moved forward into the darkness. Behind them, the Council ships watched until the last human vessel disappeared into the radiation storms, and then they turned and flew away, confident that they would never see humanity again. The Shroud. 5 years had passed since humanity entered the Shroud, and Commander Laura Bennett had stopped counting the dead. She stood on the bridge of the carrier Defiance, watching another solar storm tear across the view screen, and wondered how much longer her people could survive. The Shroud was worse than anyone had imagined, a nightmare of radiation that cooked ships from the inside out. Gravity wells that appeared without warning and crushed vessels into twisted metal, and worlds so hostile that stepping onto their surface meant death within minutes. In the first year alone, they had lost 47 ships and nearly 12,000 people. Bennett remembered every face, every name, every family that had been torn apart by this hell they had been thrown into. But humans did not surrender, and humans did not die quietly. She turned to her chief engineer, a tired man named Marcus Webb, who had not slept properly in 3 years, but refused. "To stop working, tell me you have good news," she said. Webb smiled, and it was the first real smile she had seen from him in months. "I figured it out," he said, holding up a chunk of crystal that glowed with a soft blue light. "These minerals we found on that dead moon, they absorb radiation instead of letting it pass through. If we line our hulls with this stuff, we can survive the storms." Bennett took the crystal and felt hope flicker in her chest for the first time in years. "How long until we can start production?" she asked. "Already started," Webb replied. "Give me 6 months and I can retrofit the entire fleet." On another ship across the scattered fleet, Dr. Megan Torres was working on a different kind of solution. She had been a geneticist before the exile, studying how species adapted to extreme environments, and now she was using that knowledge to help humanity survive. "The radiation is changing us," she explained to her team. "Our cells are damaged, our DNA is breaking down, but I think we can work with that instead of against it." Her research was controversial, and some people called it monstrous. But Torres knew that humanity did not have the luxury of waiting for natural evolution. She developed treatments that altered human genetics, making their cells more resistant to radiation, helping their bodies repair damage faster, allowing them to survive conditions that would have killed their ancestors. The first volunteers for the treatment were soldiers who knew they were dying anyway. Within a year, they were healthier than they had ever been. Captain Eric Shaw led the scouting missions into the deepest parts of the Shroud, taking small ships into regions so dangerous that most of his crews did not expect to return. But Shaw had a gift for finding safe paths through chaos, and his maps became lifelines for the struggling fleet. It was Shaw who made the discovery that changed everything. His ship had been badly damaged in a gravity storm, and he was drifting through an uncharted system, waiting for rescue, when his sensors detected something impossible. Metal structures on a nearby moon, artificial patterns that could only have been created by intelligent beings. "This is Shaw to fleet. Command," he transmitted, his voice shaking with excitement. "I have found something. I have found something big." When Bennett arrived with the salvage team 3 days later, she could not believe what she was seeing. An entire city lay buried beneath the moon's surface, preserved for millions of years in the cold vacuum of space. The beings who built it were long dead, but their technology remained, and it was beyond anything humanity or even the Council had ever created. They found ships that could travel faster than light, without the crude methods the galaxy currently used. They found weapons that drew power from the void itself, converting the empty darkness of space into beams of pure destruction. And they found terraforming machines, massive devices that could reshape a dead world into a living paradise. "Who were they?" Torres asked as she studied the alien bodies they found preserved in stasis chambers. "What happened to them?" Bennett shook her head, staring at the wonders around her. "I do not know," she said. "They left all of this for someone to find. Maybe they wanted to be remembered. Or maybe they wanted to give someone a chance." She thought about the Council, about the smug certainty with which they had sentenced humanity to death, and she allowed herself a small smile. "Let us make sure their gift does not go to waste," she said. Over the next 2 years, humanity worked to understand and adapt the ancient technology. It was not easy, and many died in the process of learning how the alien machines functioned. But slowly, piece by piece, they began to rebuild themselves. Webb integrated the alien power systems with human engineering, creating hybrid ships that were faster and stronger than anything they had possessed before. Torres used the genetic databases she found in the alien archives to accelerate her adaptation research, pushing human biology further than ever before. Shaw continued his exploration, mapping the Shroud and finding more alien sites, each one containing new secrets and new tools for survival. And Bennett held them all together, leading with a quiet strength that inspired her people to keep fighting, even when hope seemed lost. On the 5th anniversary of the exile, she stood before a gathering of survivors on the largest ship in the fleet, and spoke words that would become legend among future generations. "They sent us here to die," she said. "They threw us into the darkness and expected us to fade away. But we are still here." The crowd was silent, hanging on her every word. "We have lost so much," she continued. "We have buried friends, family, children who deserved better than this. And I will not pretend that we have won, because we are still fighting for our lives every single day." She paused and looked out at the faces before her, faces marked by radiation scars and exhaustion, but also by something else, something unbreakable. "But we have learned something important in these 5 years," she said. "We have learned that the universe is not our enemy. The universe is just a place, full of dangers and wonders, and it does not care if we live or die." She raised her voice, and it rang through the ship like a bell. "So we will make it care," she declared. "We will carve a home out of this hell. We will take every weapon the Shroud throws at us and turn it into a tool for survival. We will build cities where they said nothing could live. And we will raise children who will never know the fear and despair that we have known." The crowd began to cheer, softly at first, then louder and louder, until the sound filled the entire vessel. "The council thought they were killing us," Bennett shouted over the noise, "but all they did was make us stronger." In the darkness of the Shroud, surrounded by death and chaos, humanity had found a spark of hope, and they would never let it go out. The Forging. 20 years after the exile, Admiral Nathan Cole stood on the observation deck of Bastion and watched the sunrise over Haven. It was a sight that should have been impossible, a golden sun rising over green forests and blue oceans on a world that had been nothing but barren rock when humanity first arrived. The terraforming machines had worked miracles, transforming death into life, and Haven was now home to nearly 2 million humans who had been born knowing nothing but the Shroud. Cole was an older man now, his hair gray and his face lined with the weight of leadership. But his eyes were still sharp, and his mind was still clear. He had been a young captain when the exile began, serving under Commander Bennett until her death 7 years ago, and he had carried her vision forward ever since. Bastion itself was a testament to what humanity had become. Not just a space station, but a fortress city that orbited Haven like a protective shield. Guardian. Shipyards stretched for miles in every direction, producing vessels that would have made the Council's finest engineers weep with envy. Weapons platforms bristled with technology that drew power from the radiation that had once been their greatest enemy. And at the heart of it all, protected by layers of defenses that could stop a fleet, lay the Archive, the collection of ancient alien knowledge that had saved humanity from extinction. Cole turned away from the window and walked toward the research center where Dr. Katie Sullivan was waiting for him. Sullivan was the head of the scientific division, a brilliant woman who had spent 15 years studying the alien technology and learning its secrets. "You said you had something important to show me," Cole said as he entered her laboratory. Sullivan nodded, her face pale and serious. "I finally cracked the last section of the Archive," she said, "the part that was encrypted so heavily, we thought we would never get through." She led him to a holographic display that showed images and text in the alien language they had slowly learned to read. "The beings who built all of this," Sullivan said, "they called themselves the Architects, and they were old, Admiral, older than any species in the Council, older than most stars in this region of the galaxy." Cole studied the images, seeing tall, graceful beings with features that were almost human but not quite. "What happened to them?" he asked. Sullivan's hands trembled slightly as she changed the display. "They did not die naturally," she said. "They were killed, wiped out by something that came from beyond the galactic rim, something they called the Devouring." The display showed images that made Cole's blood run cold. Vast organic ships that looked like living nightmares. Swarms of creatures that consumed everything in their path. Worlds reduced to lifeless husks within days. "Architects fought them for 1,000 years, Sullivan continued, "and they lost. Their entire civilization, billions of beings across thousands of worlds, all of them consumed." Cole forced himself to keep watching, even though every instinct told him to look away. "The Shroud," he said slowly. "They created it, did they not?" Sullivan nodded. "It was their last act," she said. "They built the Shroud as a barrier, a wall of radiation and chaos that the devouring could not easily cross. They hoped it would buy time for other species to prepare, to find the weapons they left behind, to learn from their mistakes. She looked at Cole with eyes full of fear and determination. "And they left a warning," she said. "The devouring was wounded in the final battle, badly enough that it retreated to heal. But it was not destroyed, and the architects calculated that it would return." "When?" Cole asked, though he already knew he would not like the answer. "Soon," Sullivan said. "Within the next few decades, perhaps sooner. The calculations are not exact, but the devouring is coming back, and when it does, it will not stop until it has consumed everything." Cole stood in silence for a long moment, processing what he had just learned. The Council had exiled humanity to die in the Shroud, never knowing that they had sent them to the one place in the galaxy where they might find the tools to save everyone. It was almost funny in a dark and terrible way. "Does anyone else know about this?" he asked. "Just my senior researchers," Sullivan replied. "I wanted to tell you first, because this changes everything." Cole nodded slowly. "We have spent 20 years building strength," he said, "preparing ourselves to survive, maybe even to take revenge on the species that cast us out. But this is bigger than revenge." He walked to the window and looked out at the shipyards, at the fleet of warships that humanity had created from nothing. "We could stay here," he said quietly. "The Shroud protected the architects for 1,000 years. It could protect us, while the devouring destroys the Council species one by one." Sullivan came to stand beside him. "We could," she agreed. "But that is not who we are, is it?" Cole thought about Daniel Carter, standing before the Council and promising that humanity would remember. He thought about Laura Bennett, leading her people through hell with nothing but determination and hope. He thought about all the humans who had died in the Shroud, all the sacrifices that had been made to reach this moment. "No," he said finally, "that is not who we are." He turned to face Sullivan with new purpose in his eyes. "How long do we have to prepare?" he asked. "If the architect's calculations are correct, the devouring will reach Council space in about 30 years, she said, "maybe less." Cole nodded. "Then we have 30 years to build an army," he said. 30 years to create weapons that can stop a force that destroyed one of the greatest civilizations in galactic history." He smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. "The Council thought they were sending us to our graves," he said. "Instead, they sent us to the one place where we could find the power to save them." He began walking toward the door, his mind already racing with plans and possibilities. "Begin sharing the warning with the senior staff," he ordered. "We need to accelerate production on the new ship designs, and I want every scientist we have working on weapons development." Sullivan called after him. "What about the Council?" she asked. "Should we warn them?" Cole paused at the door and considered the question. The Council had shown humanity no mercy, had laughed as they sentenced 8 billion people to death, had not spared a single thought for the children who would grow up in a radioactive hell. But those children had grown up anyway, and they had become something greater than anyone had. "Not yet," Cole said. "First, we build our strength. Then, when the time is right, we show them what humanity has become." He walked out of the laboratory, and behind him, Sullivan began preparing for the war that was coming. In the Shroud, humanity had been forged in fire and radiation. Now it was time to see what that forge had created. H1. The Return. 40 years after humanity was exiled to die in the Shroud, a single ship emerged into Council space. Captain Kevin Ross stood on the bridge of the Reckoning and looked at the stars he had never seen before. Stars that belonged to the civilizations that had tried to kill his people. He had been born in the Shroud, raised on stories of the exile and the Council's cruelty, trained from childhood to be a warrior in a war that had not yet begun. And now he was here, the first human to enter Council space in 4 decades, carrying a message that would change the galaxy forever. The reaction was immediate. Within minutes of his arrival, a dozen Council warships surrounded the Reckoning, their weapons charged and ready to fire. "Unknown vessel, you are trespassing in protected space," a Valith commander broadcast. "Identify yourself immediately, or you will be destroyed." Ross smiled and activated his own communication. "System, P. This is Captain Kevin Ross of the Human Federation vessel Reckoning," he said calmly. "I am here on behalf of Admiral Claire Adams to request an audience with the Galactic Council." P. The silence that followed was almost funny. Ross could imagine the confusion spreading through the Council ships as they processed what he had just said, as they realized that the species they had sentenced to extinction was very much alive. "That is impossible," the Valith commander finally responded. "Humanity was exiled to the Shroud. No one survives the Shroud." "And yet here I am," Ross replied. "I would be happy to wait while you contact your superiors. But I should warn you that my ship's shields can withstand anything your fleet can throw at it. So please, do not do anything foolish." The Valith commander did not test that claim. Within hours, Ross was escorted to Athoria Prime, the same station where Daniel Carter had stood before the Council 40 years ago. He walked through the Great Hall with his head held high, wearing the uniform of a fleet that had been born in darkness and forged in fire. The 12 elder species watched him approach, and Ross saw fear in their eyes for the first time. "You requested an audience," the Valith Arbiter said, "the same being that had condemned humanity all those years ago. Speak." Ross smiled. "I am not here to negotiate," he said. "I am not here to beg for mercy or ask to be welcomed back into your precious council. I am here to deliver a message." He touched a control on his wrist, and a holographic projection appeared in the center of the hall, showing images of human cities, human ships, human soldiers, all of them gleaming with technology that made the Council's achievements look primitive. "Humanity survived," Ross said. "Not just survived, but thrived. We found things in the Shroud that you never imagined existed. Ancient technology from a civilization that was old when your oldest species was still learning to walk." The Council representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "We have built a fleet," Ross continued, "stronger than anything in this galaxy. We have created weapons that could destroy your homeworlds without breaking a sweat. We have become something greater than you ever feared we would become." The Valith Arbiter's mandibles clicked with what might have been anger or fear. "Is this a threat?" it demanded. "No," Ross said simply. "This is a warning, but not about us." He changed the holographic display to show the images from the Architect Archive, the nightmarish forms of the devouring, the consumed worlds, the endless destruction. "This is what is coming," Ross said. "The architects called it the devouring, and it destroyed their entire civilization. They built the Shroud to slow it down, to give other species time to prepare. That time is almost up." The hall erupted in noise as the Council representatives shouted questions and accusations. Ross waited patiently for them to quiet down. "The devouring will reach Council space within the next decade," he said. "Maybe sooner. When it does, your fleets will be useless, your defenses will crumble, and your precious civilizations will be consumed." He looked directly at the Valith Arbiter. "Humanity is offering you a chance," he said. "Stand with us against the devouring, and we will fight beside you. Refuse, and you will face the darkness alone." The Arbiter's response was immediate and harsh. "This is manipulation," it declared, "a trick to make us lower our defenses. Humanity has always been deceitful, always been dangerous." Other council members voiced their agreement, calling the warning a bluff, a scheme, a desperate attempt by exiles to regain standing. Ross shook his head, unsurprised by their reaction. "Admiral Adams expected you would say that," he said. "She told me not to argue with you, not to try to convince you. She said that some lessons can only be learned through pain." He began walking toward the exit. "When the devouring comes, and it will come, you will remember this day," he said. "You will remember that humanity tried to warn you, tried to offer help, and you threw it back in our faces." He reached the door and turned back one final time. "And then you will call out to us for salvation," he said, "and unlike you, we will answer." He left the hall, and behind him the council continued to debate and dismiss and deny. But as Ross returned to his ship, he received a transmission from Admiral Adams herself. "How did it go?" she asked. "Exactly as you predicted," Ross replied. "They did not believe me." Adams nodded, her face calm and unsurprised. She was the granddaughter of Daniel Carter, raised on stories of his defiance, trained to lead a species that had been reborn in darkness. "Then we moved to Phase 2, she said. 6 hours, 37 human warships decloaked throughout Council space. They did not fire a single shot. They simply appeared, massive vessels bristling with weapons that pulsed with energy the Council species could not identify, surrounded by shields that made their own technology look like paper armor. The message was clear. Humanity was not asking for permission, not seeking approval, not begging for recognition. They were demonstrating power, raw and undeniable, the power of a species that had been thrown into hell and had climbed back out stronger than ever before. The Valith Arbiter contacted Adams directly, its voice trembling with barely contained fury. "What is the meaning of this?" it demanded. "This is an act of war." Adams looked at the Arbiter through the communication screen, and her expression was calm, almost pitying. "No," she said, "this is a demonstration. We could have destroyed your fleets, occupied your worlds, taken revenge for what you did to us 40 years ago. But that is not why we are here." She leaned forward slightly. "The darkness is coming," she said, "and when it arrives, you will need us. I hope you realize that before it is too late." She gave the order, and the human fleet withdrew, vanishing back into the shroud as quickly as they had appeared. The council was left in chaos, their certainty shattered, their pride wounded, their fear growing with every passing moment. And in the darkness beyond the galactic rim, something ancient and hungry began to stir. 8 years after humanity's return to Council space, the devouring arrived. It came from beyond the galactic rim, a tide of organic ships that blotted out the stars, and the screaming began almost immediately. The Karathi were the first to fall, their entire civilization consumed in less than 2 weeks. The Nellian collective lasted slightly longer, managing to evacuate a few thousand survivors before their homeworld was reduced to a lifeless husk. By the end of the first month, 3 species had been rendered completely extinct, their names destined to be forgotten by a galaxy that was too busy dying to mourn them. Admiral Claire Adams watched the reports come in from her command center on Bastion, and she felt no satisfaction, no vindication, only a deep and terrible sadness for the billions of lives being lost. "The Valith homeworld is under attack," her communications officer reported. "Their fleet is collapsing. They are requesting assistance from any nearby vessels." Adams closed her eyes for a moment, remembering her grandfather's words, the promise he had made before the council all those years ago. "We will answer," she said quietly, "not because they deserve it, but because that is who we are." She opened her eyes and gave the order that would change history. "All ships, prepare for deployment," she commanded. "We are going to war." The human armada emerged from the shroud in force, over 1,000 warships carrying technology that had been refined over 4 decades of preparation. Commander Paul Morgan led the assault carriers toward the devouring fleet that was tearing the Valith defenses apart, his crews steady and ready despite the horror they were about to face. All fighters launched, his tactical officer reported. Weapons charged and ready. Morgan looked at the view screen and saw the nightmare that had destroyed the architects. The same enemy that had haunted humanity's preparations for nearly 30 years. Let us show them what the Shroud taught us, he said. The first human weapons fire struck the devouring ships, and the effect was immediate and devastating. The void cannons, designed from architect blueprints and improved by human engineers, tore through the organic hulls like they were made of paper. The radiation-based weapons, born from the very energy that had been meant to kill humanity, burned the devouring creatures from the inside out. The enemy reeled, surprised for the first time in millions of years by prey that actually fought back. On the surface of the Valith homeworld, survivors looked up at the sky and saw human ships descending to provide cover. Human soldiers dropping from transports to establish defensive perimeters. Human medics rushing to help the wounded. The Valith Arbiter, the same being that had condemned humanity to extinction, watched from a bunker as the species it had tried to destroy fought and died to save its people. Why? It asked the human officer, who had come to evacuate the government officials. Why are you helping us, after everything we did to you? The officer, a young woman named Sandra Cole, who was the great-granddaughter of Nathan Cole, looked at the Arbiter with something like pity. Because someone has to, she said simply, and we are the only ones who can. The Battle of the Valith Threshold lasted 19 days, and it was the largest conflict the galaxy had ever seen. Dr. Lisa Hart coordinated the deployment of the reality weapons, devices based on the most dangerous architect technology that could tear holes in the fabric of space itself. She watched as entire sections of the devouring fleet were swallowed by artificial black holes, as dimensional rifts scattered enemy ships across thousands of light years, as the monsters that had consumed countless civilizations, finally, learned what it meant to face an enemy that would not surrender. Captain Diane Moore commanded the strike force that pushed deep into the heart of the devouring formation, searching for the command cluster that coordinated the enemy's movements. She found it, a massive organic structure surrounded by thousands of defensive vessels, and she knew that destroying it might turn the tide of the battle. All ships, target the central mass, she ordered. Everything we have. Her crew looked at her with understanding in their eyes. The command cluster's defenses were too strong. The only way to guarantee its destruction was to get close, too close to survive. It has been an honor serving with all of you, Moore said. She drove her vessel into the heart of the enemy formation, absorbing fire that would have destroyed a dozen council ships, her shields failing one by one as she closed the distance. At the last moment, she activated the void reactor overload, and the explosion that followed was visible from 100 light-years away. The command cluster was destroyed, and with it, the coordination that had made the devouring so unstoppable. The enemy fleet fell into chaos, individual ships acting without guidance, easy prey for the human forces that swept through them. When the silence finally fell, the devouring was broken. Not destroyed completely, but wounded badly enough to retreat back beyond the galactic rim, licking its wounds, perhaps to return someday, but not for a very long time. Admiral Adams stood before the shattered council one final time. The great hall of Athoria Prime was damaged, scarred by the war that had come so close to ending everything, but it still stood. 6 of the 12 elder species had survived, their representatives looking at Adams with a mixture of shame, gratitude, and something that might have been respect. Humanity saved us, the Valith Arbiter said, and its voice was quiet, humbled. After everything we did, after the cruelty we showed you, you came to our rescue. Adams nodded slowly. Yes, she said, we did. Why? The Arbiter asked. We sentenced you to death. We laughed as you were dragged into the shroud. We did not believe your warning, even when you tried to help us. Adams considered the question for a long moment. My grandfather stood in this hall 40 years ago, she said finally. He told you that humanity would remember what you did to us. Every child in the shroud learned about the Council's judgment, about the exile, about the death sentence you passed on our entire species. She paused and looked around the hall at the survivors of a war that had nearly destroyed everything. But he also told you something else, she continued. He told you that when you needed us, when something came that you could not stop on your own, you would call out for help, and he promised that we would answer. Her voice was steady and strong. Humanity does not break its promises, she said, not even to those who tried to break us. The Arbiter bowed its head. We were wrong about your species, it said. We were afraid of your growth, your ambition, your refusal to accept the place we assigned you. We should have seen that those qualities would make you our salvation, not our destruction. Adams smiled, and it was a sad smile, full of memories of all the people who had died to reach this moment. You exiled us to the void, she said. You thought you were sending us to our graves. She turned and began walking toward the exit, just as her grandfather had done all those years ago. But you were wrong, she called back. The void was not our grave. It was our forge. She reached the door and looked back at the council one final time. And now, she said, the void belongs to us. She walked out into a galaxy that would never forget what humanity had done. They had been exiled, abandoned, left to die in the darkness, and they had become something greater than anyone had imagined possible. The stars stretched out before them, full of possibility and wonder and new challenges to face, and humanity was ready for all of it.